Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio, and today I'm going to be taking a look at Race to the Raft, the newest game from designer Frank West and publisher The City of Games. Race to the Raft is a follow-up to the Isle of Cats, and I think a lot of people are going to be looking for comparisons between the two, and that is something I'm going to address in the review. But first, let's head over to the table. I'll show you how the game plays. I'll cover the basic tutorial scenarios and then talk about the advanced scenarios. Then we'll come back here and I will let you know what I think. All right, here we see a setup for Race to the Raft. What you're looking at here is the first tutorial mission in the game. And so what you're going to do before every game is you're going to choose a particular scenario. You're going to look in the campaign book here, and you're going to choose which one you want to do. So I'm showing you the most basic tutorial that is called First Steps here. And it has 0 difficulty. The number of paw prints will give you that notion. And then it's going to tell you what specific cards to put in particular areas, the fire cards and your cat beginning cards and the raft. So on the board you see all that represented. You see this card 3 here, card 5 and card 7 with the beginning cat spots. You see raft A there, and there are some fire cards that are also out here. Your goal in this game is, it is a cooperative game. You are trying to get each of these cats to this raft before a loss condition occurs. The cats are going to move only on the terrain that is associated with their color. So green cats move on the green path, blue on blue, and orange here on the kind of yellow one there. All right? The loss conditions are, if you ever have to draw a fire tile out of this bag and you have no valid place to put it, that would be a loss condition. If this bag ever runs out of fire tiles, that would be a loss condition. Or if you ever find that one of the cats has no valid path left to get to the raft, that would be a loss condition. Otherwise, the way to win, get all of the cats to the raft. Okay, there are also a lot of elements that are in the game that are not represented in this first tutorial, but I'll talk a little bit about those briefly after we finish this up. All right, at the beginning of a round, each player is going to draw 3 cards, and they're going to draw them from these decks. You can draw from any of these decks. You can draw all 3 from one or from a combination of others. They're all going to give you a little bit of information on the back of them. These are the backs of the cards. So this X deck is telling you that it's going to primarily have green and blue squares on the other side of this card, some red, and a little bit less of the yellow and the purple. If you look at this one, the circle deck, you'll see that it's mostly red and blue. It has 0 purple, so you'll never find a purple square on any of the cards in this deck. So it gives you a little bit of information. When you draw the cards, there can potentially be some discussion before either player begins. But this is a limited communication game. There are very strict rules about what you can and cannot say. Essentially, you can't give very specific information. You could say things like, I'm good on green, but you couldn't say I have a straight path of green or I have 3 squares of green. Nothing like that. You can just give vague notions of what you might have. And when you're drawing cards, although you can draw them from any deck you want, you're not allowed to look at the front of the cards until you have chosen all 3. So let's say player 1 is going to pick one from the X, one from the circle there, and maybe another X. All right, player 2 will take a square, a triangle, and a X. All right. Okay, once you have chosen your cards, then you can flip them over. I'll flip them over. You're not going to flip them over in the real game. You'll be looking at them. You can't let your partner know what you've got, but for the purposes of the camera, I'll show you what's on the front of these cards. At the beginning of a round, there is no turn order. Throughout the round, there is no turn order. Anybody can go at any time. So one player could play all 3 of their cards if they wanted to before the next player goes, or you can kind of change it up. Again, you have very specific ways you can communicate when you're talking about who's going to go next. All right? Let's say, for example, player 1 says that they're good on green and they want to start working on the green path. They could play this card anywhere they want. There are, well, not anywhere they want. Let's talk about the limitations here. You can't have partial squares. You have to completely cover other squares. You cannot play over any of these fire cards or fire tiles when they come out, and you can't slide cards under other cards. So let's say player 1 does something like this. They place this card right here, And maybe they say, if it's okay, I'm going to go again. And they go like this. Okay, now player 2 says, I'd like to get moving a little bit here. I want to get in on the action. So they'll play a card right here. And maybe they'll play a card right here. Okay, so that's one of the two things you can do on your turn is play a pathway card. The other thing you can do on your turn is move a cat because you have to get these cats to the raft. So let's say player 1 decides they're going to move the green cat. What they do is they discard a card. There's going to be a little disaster pile over here. They move any of the cats as far as they want on their chosen pathway and in any direction. So this green cat could come all the way down here. Okay, because that's an uninterrupted path of green. When you move a cat, two things are going to happen. You're going to turn it on its side because it becomes exhausted, and then you're going to draw a fire tile from this bag, and you have to place it. These are polyomino shapes, so let's see, I just picked out this one. These have to be placed at least one square adjacent, and diagonal does not count as adjacent, next to any of these other fire tiles. So I have a lot of options, but since I know that the green cat is unlikely to come way back here, I might do something like this, okay? So that would be a valid placement there because I'm not covering any other fire tiles and I'm not, covering a cat because that would not be good. Let's say player 2 also wanted to move a cat. They would discard to that disaster pile. Now they have options. They can move any of the cats except this exhausted cat. To do that, you have to discard 2 cards, and they only had one more card left in their hand, so they can't move the green cat, but perhaps they'll move the orange cat right here. Okay? Once everybody has played their cards, then it becomes rest. What's going to happen is any of the exhausted cats are going to stand back up, and you're going to repeat the process drawing 3 cards until you either get all of the cats to the raft or you meet one of the loss conditions. That disaster pile that I've mentioned is a way to bring more fire out on the board. So whenever there are 4 cards in that disaster pile, you're going to take them, put them in a discard, and then you have to draw another fire token from the bag and place it somewhere. So whether you are moving cats or whether you are placing pathway cards, more and more fire is going to be engulfing the island, as you would expect fire tends to do. All right, so that is the very basics of the game with the tutorial mode. Now let's talk a little bit about some changes that happen. So starting in the second tutorial, Ancient Trail here, it says from now on, use the communication tokens. So these are the 2 types of communication tokens, and depending upon player count, you're going to have at least one of each of these distributed to all the players, and these are going to allow you to break some of those communication rules. The talk token just essentially lets you talk. You don't have to follow those rules of the limited communication, but those are limited resources, of course, so you want to be careful when you use them. The meow token is another form of communication, but the only thing that you can do is say the word meow. You can say it basically however you want it, with different emphasis, trying to communicate without actually communicating, just saying the word meow. So that's something that's starting with tutorial 2, you'd have those in every game, except for the solo game, of course, because the limited communication does not apply there. From tutorial 3 and onwards, you have a couple other things that get added. It has an additional objective. Green arrives first. I'll show you how that works. And it says, from now on, use the water and objective tokens. Water tokens right here, you'll have 3 at the beginning of a game. You can, at any point where communication is allowed, you can choose to spend 1 water token to remove any 1 fire tile from the board. But every token that you use is going to reduce your score for the scenario, because these scenarios all will get a score associated with them. The objective tokens are going to be for different, more advanced rafts. It says green arrives first. So you would find a 1, actually I've got it in this bag here, and you would place the 1 on the green, because green needs to arrive first, okay? And these will get more and more complicated and difficult as the game goes on. But you'll see that in 3, you use the B raft. So it allows for these objective tokens. Once you get to the advanced mode, some things are going to change. Moving a cat action change. You can no longer move any number of spaces you want. You can move a maximum of 5 spaces. And instead of discarding your cards when you move a cat to create a disaster pile, instead you're going to have a specific disaster pile here. And so whenever a disaster occurs, instead of dragging or drawing a fire tile from the bag, you're going to do one of these. And it'll tell you what to do in order, okay? Discard a card and then place a fire tile. You go in order from top to bottom. These are definitely more difficult. Draw a card, place a fire tile. There's a number of these things that will affect you once you get to the advanced mode, in addition to all the other things that we talked about before. But once you arrive to the raft, once any cat arrives to the raft, you can do some things in this advanced mode. The active player can draw a pathway card. You can move any one cat a maximum of 5 spaces. All right, so that's the basics of the game along with the extra stuff added. Let's head back and I'll let you know what I think. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea on how the game is played, both in its basic form and in the more advanced forms that you'll find as you progress through the different scenarios. So, I mentioned comparisons, and at the very beginning of this, I think that I do want to just talk a little bit about them, because I think the comparisons may actually inform whether it's a game that you'll find is for you or not. So, the Isle of Cats, the previous game in this line, was a game that had some puzzle elements. Certainly, you were placing polyomino tiles on your boat, trying to gain particular bonuses, trying to meet scoring objectives, and so that was part of that game, variable scoring cards. There was also an economic element to the game. So, it was a game that had a few different facets going on at the same time. Race to the Raft is a much more pure puzzle game. I can't emphasize that enough. This is a logical, spatial reasoning type of puzzle game. And so I think your reaction to the game, your experience with the game will likely be informed upon whether that's something that you tend to like or not. And I'll just put it out there right now. I love these types of games. So I went into this with a little bit of background, obviously playing the Isle of Cats quite a bit and really enjoying that. And then coming into this one and finding that it is a puzzle, pure and simple puzzle. Well, not simple, farthest thing from simple, but a pure puzzle game. I'm actually going to start talking about the elements of the game that did not work for me, and then I will talk about the things that I liked. So, because by doing so, I'm going to touch on the major things like art and components and the gameplay and everything like that. So, the first issue that I have with the game is that it is a limited communication game, all right? I tend to really struggle with limited communication in games because I find what often happens is that people accidentally will mess something up, which isn't the biggest of deals in the world. But what I find more often is that particular groups want to kind of game the game. And at that point, I find, what's the point of limited communication? If you're going to kind of dance around it and basically do what you're not supposed to be doing in a kind of coy way, I just don't like it. It bothers me. And so I think any game that has limited communication as a component is at risk of causing that issue. Again, it will likely depend on the players that are involved, but I just don't really love them, limited communication games. And in this case, I especially don't like the meow token. I just have to say it, this is a very personal thing. I just don't like this idea of saying the word meow in different ways with different emphasis. For me, it just doesn't work. Now, I will say that I think for some players, they're going to love the meow token because what I can see it doing is adding a bit of levity to a game that is very much a crunchy puzzle game, and you can get really kind of focused on the board and focused on your own cards, and you're already not talking much to the players around the table. And with this meow token, it definitely could add a bit of levity and silliness to a game that is really more of a puzzle type of a thing and a singular focus. So For some people it may work. For me, it just didn't. Now, you don't have to play with it. I can't see any reason. I don't believe, I haven't played all the scenarios, but I don't believe any of the scenarios would be broken without using the meow token. So, you can kind of take that as you see it. Just know that it's there, and if you also have issues with certain forms of limited communication, it may not work for you, or you may find it your favorite part of the game because it adds some levity to it. So, limited communication is one issue. Another issue I have is with the graphic design of the game. So when you lay it out, it, in my opinion, is very visually overwhelming, okay? It is hard to kind of focus because there's just a lot going on visually. Now, I will say that one element of that is that they made accommodations for colorblind players, which I think is absolutely important, essential, really, to make your game as accessible as possible. And so I applaud them, the publisher, the designer, for doing that. I do think there could have been a way to do it, because really how they do it now is there are particular little landmarks that is associated with each color. And so if you can't see the green clearly or the yellow clearly, you can look at the landmark and you'll know this is a green spot, this is a yellow spot. That's great. I do wish there was a way they could have done it that was slightly less, that was maybe a smaller total amount of that tile. I'm not saying that clearly. They need to be smaller, in my opinion, because it's just a large lot of stuff going on. I also don't really particularly love the look of the fire cards and tiles. I think I know what they were going for, because it definitely is a stark contrast with the bright, colorful pathway cards and the boards. But again, to me, it's just too much. It's almost garish to me, and I don't tend to love that in art direction. So those are my big kind of issues. I don't know how big they are, but they are things that I have found that didn't work for me as well in this game. But there's a whole lot that does. So let me talk about that first, after talked about things I didn't like. So the elements that I love, there are, like I said, quite a few. It's that the type of puzzle that this game presents, and it's varying iterations of this type of puzzle, is that spatial element that I really like, and the logical timing element that I really, really like in puzzle games. And this has that in spades, right? It's everywhere. And so I love the puzzle, the core design of this game. That puzzle, I think, is fantastic. And it is so much content. There is so much content in this game. Like I said, I think there's 80-some scenarios. I have not gotten close to playing through all of those. And as you move through it, I like how they add just enough to kind of keep the difficulty going, ramping up, but there's not constantly new things being added. Really, the communications tokens are still added in those tutorial missions. The advanced mode is quite a bit later, and that adds quite a bit of things that really make the game more challenging. And I think that this is a game that has a good challenge to it. So I really, really enjoy that. And as a solo game, this is a review primarily for the multiplayer, but as a solo game, I really, really like it. I think it is a fantastic solo game and a very good multiplayer game. So the puzzle is really good. I really like how the card system works. I think that's a very, very smart way to handle it, where you can kind of get an idea of the distribution on these cards, but you don't know exactly. And speaking of those cards, I really, even though I've said that I don't particularly like a lot of limited communication, I like how it's handled with the cards. I would never be comfortable with saying, I've got 6 green squares on this card, or I've got an L shape in purple. Then you're really losing the heart of what the game is. So some limited communication, I think, is essential in a multiplayer game like this. And I really, for the cards, I love how it's implemented. I think that's a very, very smart system. I like how easy it is to set up and tear down. It's a breeze. I mean, the scenario books the campaign book is great at telling you how to get set up. If you play multiple sessions in a row, it's not going to take you much time at all to change from one to the other. So a very, very good time to play ratio, setup time to playing ratio. I feel like it nails that. So all of this being said, I'm going to be giving Race to the Raft an 8 out of 10, an easy recommendation, a seal of approval. It would be a higher score strictly as a solo game, but in a multiplayer game, it is still very, very good. Just keeping in mind the things that didn't work for me, you know, kind of use that as just something to think about if you're looking to pick the game up or play the game. If you know kind of your play style and your opinions on these types of things, maybe that can help you inform that decision. All right, well, that's going to do it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from the Dice Tower Midwest Annex.